Morning, everyone, and
Morning.
welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. This morning, we are looking at Psalm 47, and like some of the other Psalms in this series of Psalms between Psalm 42 and Psalm 49, we find ourselves in a set of Psalms that are all attributed to or connected to the tradition of the Korachite musicians. And many of these psalms have a different emotional tenor than some of the other psalms that we had been looking at before we got to the mid 40s. Um, the the David psalms that we had been looking at, they dealt with enemies without and enemies within. And they were petitionary psalms that asked God for specific things. And we looked at different ways that those psalms are connected to prayer, and it seemed very obvious how you might use some of those psalms in a prayerful way. And the psalms in the mid 40s, not all of them, but a lot of them have a different aspect. These are psalms that are related to the king, psalms that are psalms that are connected to um, the coronation of the king, or psalms. We saw one that was a psalm of praise to the new foreign wife of the king. And today's psalm is a coronation psalm. So we're gonna read it, and we're gonna think about how we might what is the emotion that is being contained in this psalm, and how we might think about using it in our own prayer service. Yeah, it I know it's warmer than yesterday, but you still need a coat, Sakai. Yeah. All right. So let me share my screen with you, and we'll jump into looking at the psalm. All right. La menatseach livnei korach mizmor. Kol ha'amim tiku chaf, hariu lelohim bekol rina. Ki Adonai elyon norah, melech gadol al kol haaretz. Yadber amim tachtenu ulumim tachat raglenu. Yivchar lanu et nachalatenu et geon Yaakov asher ahev. Zela. Allah Elohim bitrua Adonai bekol shofar. Zamiru Elohim zameru. Zamiru lemalkenu zameru. Ki melech al kol haaretz Elohim zamaru maskil. Malach Elohim al goyim Elohim yashav al kisei kodsho. Nidivei amim nesafu am Elohei Avraham ki Elohim maginei eretz meod na'ala. I feel like I need to say this psalm again. Lamenateach livnei korach mizmor. Kol haimim tiku chaf, hariu Elohim b'kol rina. Ki Adonai elyon nora, melech gadol al kol haaretz. Yadber amim tachtenu ulumim tachat raglenu. Yivchar lanu et nachalatenu et geon Yaakov asher ahev. Selah. Allah Elohim bitrua Adonai b'kol shofar. Zameru Elohim zameru. Zameru lemalkenu zameru. Ki melech kol haaretz Elohim, zamru maskil.
Maskil.
Malach Elohim al goyim Elohim yashav al kisei kodsho. Nidivei amim nesafu. Am Elohei Avraham, Kil Elohim magine eretz meod na'ala. Read a translation. For the leader of the Korachites, a psalm. All you peoples, clap your hands, raise a joyous shout for God. For God Most High is awesome. great ruler over all the earth, who subjects peoples to us, sets nations at our feet. God chose our heritage for us, the pride of Jacob, the beloved. Selah. God ascends midst acclamation, the eternal to the blasts of the horn. Sing, oh, sing to God. Sing, oh, sing to our sovereign. For God is ruler over all the earth. Sing a hymn. God reigns over the nations. God is seated on the holy throne. The great of the peoples are gathered together, the retinue of Abraham's God. For the guardians of the earth belong to God, who is greatly exalted. Here's another translation. For the chief musician, a psalm of the sons of Korah. Clap your hands, all you peoples. Acclaim God with shouts of joy. For the Lord the Most High is to be revered. He is the great king over all the earth. He subdues peoples under us. He puts nations at our feet. He chose us. He chose for us our heritage, the pride of Jacob, whom he loved. Selah. God ascends his throne amid shouts of joy. The Lord amid blasts of the horn. Sing to the Lord. Sing. Sing to our King. Sing. For God is king over all the earth. Sing with keen understanding. God reigns over the nations. God is seated on his holy throne. O princes of the people, gather together, you people who are faithful to the God of Abraham. For the guardians of the earth belong to God, and he is exalted above them all. One last one from Rabbi Richard Levy. For the conductor, a psalm of the sons of Korah. Sound tekiah, O peoples, clap your hands. Sound teruah for God, make a joyful noise in song. For Adonai on high is awesome, a great monarch over all the earth, whose words subdue people under us and nations under our feet. You choose our inheritance for us, the pride of Jacob, whom you love. Selah. God has ascended with Truah, Adonai, through the sound of the shofar. Sing, God, sing, sing to our majesty, sing. For the majesty of all the earth is God. Sing a maskil song. God rules over peoples. God sits on the holy throne. The people's nobles have gathered together, and the people of the God of Abraham, for to God belongs the shields of the earth. God is surely in ascendance. So first of all, what is the emotional resonance of this psalm? What do you feel when you read it?
Is triumphal, exulting, confident, and victorious.
All right. So Murray says there is a feeling of triumph in this psalm, a feeling of the glory of God. There is, uh, I can mute for a minute. Hang on. Sorry, everyone. We're going through a bit of a stomach virus from the JCC in our home, and
Oh,
Zakai just threw up everywhere.
great.
Uh, I know, very pleasant,
Hmm.
but that's why I'm at home instead of at the office because I didn't want to get anybody sick. And anyway, I just trying to do the right thing. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna continue. Yeah. So a feeling of triumph. Does anybody have other comments that you want to say? Gary, Reich, Gary Reich.
Um, who is being crowned and who is the triumphant one? I mean, is it, by the way, is it objectionable to say Yahweh in this context?
No, you can.
Uh, but it sounds to me like Yahweh is sort of in competition with uh, the gods of other peoples, something
Hmm.
like that.
Okay. Um, I, I'm not sure. It's definitely the case that I see that God is subduing other nations. I'm not sure that it's obvious to me that this psalm is referring to our God subduing the gods of the other nations. That doesn't that doesn't jump out as being like an obvious read, though there is one verse where it might be verse 9, Malach Elohim al Goyim, Elohim Yashav al Kisei Kodsho. Like depending on how you break that up, you might understand that it's also the gods of the nations that God is ascendant over. But I actually think it's just referring to God twice in the first phrase of that and the second phrase. But that said, I'm not. Uh, I wouldn't. I wouldn't hold myself to that because I do think that um, the the Bible does acknowledge the gods of other nations as being extant realities, right? Like unlike our more pure version of monotheism, that sort of our monotheism very much says, nope, God is the only God, and there's there exists no other entities, no other divine beings, right? God is alone. The that there are definitely folk voices in the in Tanakh that have a different manifestation of monotheism, where monotheism is worship one God, think that our God is ascendant over all the other gods, but acknowledge that the other gods have some reality. Um, so in that respect, I think it could be that. And then going back to your original question, who is being crowned? If I presented this as a coronation psalm, is the person being crowned a flesh and blood king? Is this to be used in a rite of coronation for a king of Israel? Or is this a psalm about crowning God king? Or some version of that. And I think that's a great question, right? They have found psalms like this psalm, coronation psalms that were clearly for flesh and blood kings in ancient Mesopotamia, right? Like we have Sumerian psalms, Sumerian texts that are coronation psalms that have a similar structure to this one that are clearly about flesh and blood kings. And this psalm seems to be using that well known formula, but instead of being about a flesh and blood king, this seems to be a coronation psalm for the divine. Now, that interpretation of this psalm is contested. Uh, Alter writes in his commentary on this psalm that some have posited that this is a coronation for God, but others have, but there's no definitive proof of that. That's what Alter says. Um, for myself, like I I know that I've shared with you um that I see Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot as all part of one thematic unit. First, well, you start with Sukkot. Sukkot is what is referred to as the holiday. And the reason why it is the holiday is because it is the most important thing. Like Sukkot is the holiday which acknowledges the Zakai, I really need you to not shout at me. Uh, the Sukkot is the holiday which describes whether the world is judged favorably for rain. It is the holiday which, in the ancient world, determined whether the rain was going to come in its season or not. It's a harvest festival, a festival of gratitude and thanksgiving, but it is also a supplicative festival, very deeply supplicating for future harvests as well. In order to prepare for the for praying for rain, in order to prepare for that, you wanted to get rid, expiate, wipe away all of your sins from the previous year. So Yom Kippur comes as a way of preparing for the prayers for rain on Sukkot. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is very much deeply connected to Yom Kippur thematically, because only once you've expiated yourself from your sins can you enter into a relationship with God and pray for rain. And then 10 days before Yom Kippur is the coronation ceremony of God, where you acknowledge that it is God who can bring the rain, and God who controls life and death and the judgments of all. And so the like first we crown God king, then we say we're sorry, and only then do we pray for rain. So they're all connected. And in fact, that like our liturgy shows that even the tunes that we use on the final days of Sukkot are the Yom Kippur tunes, because originally Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah was actually all tied into the same holiday of Sukkot. And then we stretched it out so that we didn't have to do, so that Sukkot itself didn't have to do all the work. So in that respect, I do see like the coronation of God as being a part of of the myth that I tell about how ancient Israel handled um, theology. But Alter would say that all of that I just presented to you is conjecture. It is based on some good uh ideas, but we don't have a text that says that. Like there's no definitive proof that what I just said was correct, or that ancient Israelites really thought about Rosh Hashanah as being a coronation of God as king. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that points in that direction, but Alter would say there's no definitive proof. So I like it. I like it as as an idea, and certainly I see that in this. I see that in this psalm. Mark or Barry,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
you unmuted, so I thought maybe you had something you wanted to say.
Oh, no.
All right. Does anybody else have? Yeah, Murray.
It just seems to me that the power, the glory, the adornment that is described in the psalm is much, much too great for a human, for a king. That it has to be the coronation, the acceptance, the reliance upon God.
Yeah, certainly this, because Adonai is Elyon Norah, right? And there, right, is the word Elyon. Elyon is sometimes a name for God. It means most high. But here, maybe the word Elyon is adjectival, not a noun, not the proper noun name for God. And you can see that some of the translations deal with that differently. So, right, the phrase in what is our verse 3, right? Ki Adonai Elyon Norah, Melech Gadol al Kol Haaretz, right? Some of the translations translate that as God Most High. There, that's using it as a as a noun, as a proper noun. God Most High, that's one of God's names. But some of them, like the old JPS, right? The Lord is Most High. There it's adjectival. The Lord is exalted and awesome, right? And so this question of uh, whether Elyon is a um, is a proper noun or an adjective, like does go to this question that Murray is responding to of this psalm seems so like over the top praise of the power of this king of God. It has to be that the entity being crowned is it is the divine being and not some flesh and blood king. Yeah, and certainly the it does seem like the subject of this psalm is divine. Other thoughts? Does anybody have a sense of how you would use this psalm if you were going to use it in your own spiritual life?
I would think one could use it in any of the life events in a person's life, well, whether it is after a wedding, after a bar mitzvah, after a brit milah, the giving the praise and the adoration of God for all that has been achieved to that moment.
Nice. Any other thoughts?
It's such an inspirational song. I have a musical instrument, which was created by Mishka, one of her paper cuts, um, near my bed to remind me to sing to God. Um, it it's a beautiful thought. Um,
Yeah, in addition to how um how much we praise God in this psalm and how over the top is the praise, there's in verse 7 commands to the other people who are hearing this psalm, sing, sing to God,
mhm,
right? The musicality of this psalm is very, very present. And certainly that fits with what we have discussed about the Korachites and uh, the Korachite school of writing psalms, that they are very musical. Last week's psalm was actually called uh, a song, and and here we again find ourselves with with a uh, the musicality, right, including the command to sing as part of this psalm.
mm, yeah.
Alba.
Okay. When I read this psalm, I I worked a billion years ago when I was like 27. I worked in a Scottish five-star hotel. And they had this thing about piping in, with bagpipes, piping in the haggis. And it was a real big deal, the haggis and this practically inedible thing. And they pipe it in. And there was a poem by Robbie Burns called, Bringing in the Haggis. And then there's the wedding cake, when you have this wedding cake that comes in and people stand up sometimes, depends on what kind of wedding you go to. And, there's applause and stuff like that. And then, like, when I think of Mao when I think about Mao Zor, na, ni, na, na, I think of this psalm as well. I think of, like, number 47. I think of this kind of thing that maybe we should sing this, at Hanukkah time, since we are at Hanukkah time. And maybe we should sing this kind of a thing. I don't know if it's put to music, probably is. Sing this kind of thing. And when I think of the piping in the haggis and the poem by Robbie Burns, it's nice, it's fun, but it doesn't come near to Psalm 47. Psalm 47 is a real, piping in of something. It's like, we had a war, we won, let's eat. And that's what when I think of 47, I think of, maybe Mao Zedong should kind of like step aside and we should sing this.
So the 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 energy of this psalm reminds you of the same kind of energy that you might have when when uh when doing something that requires a lot of public fanfare. This psalm is like the the public fanfare that you might have when you bring in the haggis or when you
Mm,
bring in the wedding cake. And something about that emotional feeling of fanfare connects you to Hanukkah because
yeah.
Hanukkah is a holiday about publicizing the miracle of the oil. It is about having a fanfare, getting out there
Mhm.
and in the world and saying God does miracles, and and there is we see the presence and the reality of God in our world. And
Yeah, you know,
so Hanukkah's the fanfare of Hanukkah is very much uh, connected to the feeling of this song. And you talked about the hymn Ma'oz Tzur, which describes God as a rock that in every generation there is a need for a miracle, and God meets that need. In every generation, the the Jewish people need some help, and God meets that need. I don't know if you know, but usually people only sing the first verse of Mao's Tzur,
mm,
which is the verse that describes uh, the general case. The general case is that God meets the need, right? Here's a translation of the first verse of Mao's Tzur. Mighty rock of my salvation, to praise you is a delight. Restore my house of prayer, that we may bring a thanksgiving offering. When you prepare defeat for the blaspheming foe, then I will complete the dedication of the altar with songs of praise. Right
right.
there is a triumphant, right. There's a prayer there, right. God, please, you are so great to worship. I want to be able to worship you. So let's make sure that the temple is rebuilt so that we can worship you. But there are, in fact, uh, four other verses to this song, to this hymn, Maoz Tzur, and I'll just read through the translation of them. I think it really goes to the in every generation there is a need, right? Troubles had consumed my soul, they had sapped my strength. They had embittered my life with hardship, in bondage to the calf worshipping kingdom, Egypt. But with great power, God brought out the treasured ones, while Pharaoh's army and his offspring sank like a stone into the deep. So you could sing that one on Passover. Second
Mhm.
verse, to God's holy house, the temple, God brought me. But even there I had no rest. An oppressor came and exiled me, for I served foreign gods. I drank poisoned wine, which refers to the Babylonian culture. The instant I departed. But at Babylon's end, Zerubbabel came, and after 70 years I was saved, which refers to the return after the destruction of the first temple, the return to the land of Israel. We don't actually have a holiday that celebrates the return uh, at the end of the first after the destruction of the first temple at the Persian period. We don't we don't have a specific holiday that commemorates that, but you could sing this verse on Tisha B'Av, I would think, at the very end of Tisha B'Av, right? To mark that moment of knowing that there is exile, there is destruction, but there's also return that comes from it. The third verse, the Agagite, Haman, son of Hamdatah, tried to cut down this towering cypress, Mordecai, but it became a snare and a trap, silencing his arrogance. You raised up the Benjaminite, that's Mordecai. You erased the name of the enemy, and his sons and followers you hanged on a tree. So that verse very much connects to the holiday of Purim. So you could sing Maoz Tzur at Purim and focus on that verse. And then the final verse, the Greeks gathered against me back in the time of the Hasmoneans. They broke through the walls of my towers and defiled all of the oils. But from the remnant of the flasks, a miracle was performed for the roses, meaning Israel, and the sages established 8 days of song and joy. That's why we associate Maoz Tzur with Hanukkah, because the fifth and final verse of the song is the verse that describes the miracle of Hanukkah. And so you're pointing to the triumphalism of this song, of this psalm, of this hymn, right? Maoz Tzur is a hymn which goes through each of these holidays, the holidays where we say they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat, those those holidays, and cast them as all being related to a desire to worship God and to worship God with thanksgiving, with offering sacrifices on the altar. I think there's something very powerful to seeing that connection between this Psalm 47, and the idea of Hanukkah. Alba.
Yeah, I just went through Cooper Smith. They only have what he only puts down one verse. Then I went to this thing called Songs of Zion, which has only one verse. And then the New Jewish Songbook, which is not so new anymore. And they only had one verse. And so I know that there are four verses, but I never heard the other three, which was kind of cool. The other thing is that since we're in this Hanukkah time, there's been a lot of stuff on the internet. JTSA has, a little Zoominar, and then there's other people that have Zoominars about Hanukkah and the history behind when we celebrate Hanukkah. And the word Sukkot comes up constantly,
That's right.
that in some way, shape, or form, Sukkot and Hanukkah are related, because the question was, why is Hanukkah 8 days? And Sukkot is, 7 days plus Shemini Atzeret, tagged on the end. Could you clear that up for me with this
Sure.
Hanukkah thing, or is that outside
No,
the
no,
the
no.
pale of this particular get together?
I'm happy to answer the question. It's directly in the Book of Maccabees. The Book of
Right,
Maccabees,
right.
the Book of Maccabees uh isn't in our Tanakh, right? It wasn't
Right, because
included.
it's apocrypha.
Right. It wasn't included in our Tanakh, but we have them. They are extant. When I say they, I mean because there are actually four books of Maccabees. But in the second book of Maccabees, uh, it is explicit that when they finished fighting, when the Hasmoneans finished fighting and rededicated the temple for worship, the first thing that they did was they observed the holiday which was the one that they had most recently missed, which
Mm-hmm.
is
Sukkot.
Sukkot. And so, right, Sukkot is the immediate preceding holiday to Hanukkah. And so they immediately, and it describes that they celebrated Sukkot with the shaking of the lulav and the marches with the myrtle branches. And it's not exactly the same way that we observe Sukkot, but it is clearly and identifiably the Sukkot holiday. And so, yes, the story of the miracle of the oil, the story of the reason why it lasts 8 days is because the oil lasted for 8 days. That is a story which its first record is in the Babylonian Talmud, which is 800 years after the time of the Maccabees. But the book of Maccabees was written in the same century as the as the events that are describing it. It was, by the way, not contemporary. It was not written at the same time. It was written 2 or 3 generations after, but in the same century, in the same 100 years. And uh, the at that time, right, the book of Maccabees does not mention the miracle of the oil, right? The book of
Mm.
Maccabees describes 8 days because Sukkot is 8 days long. The other reason why it's 8 days has to do with the idea of Hanukkah, of dedication and rededication. Several times in the Torah and in Tanakh, there are uh, accounts of the dedication of the temple or the dedication of the Mishkan, and those dedication ceremonies also sometimes took 8 days. So, in the time of
Mhm.
Solomon, when he dedicated the first temple, it took him 8 days to do it. He had an 8 day long dedication festival. And in the book of Leviticus, describes the 8 day long ceremony of of dedicating the Mishkan. And we know it was 8 days because on the eighth day, this really tragic, terrible thing happened where Nadav and Avihu died. Um, but that followed 7 days of these of this dedication, that dedicating Aaron and his sons as the ones who would then be the priests. So so when we ask, why is Hanukkah 8 days, the two most historically accurate reasons are because Sukkot is 8 days and they were celebrating Sukkot, uh, and because all dedication ceremonies of the temple in the ancient times, there were many other examples of 8 day long dedication ceremonies. So of course, this rededication ceremony would also be 8 days long. Only later did the miracle of the oil come to be the story that was told to explain why 8 days.
That was great.
Yeah. So,
Thanks.
and if you read in the book of Maccabees, you'll see that it's
Which
very
book?
explicit
Second
there.
book? Second book?
The second book of
Any
Maccabees.
particular verse?
I'm not off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah. It's somewhere in the middle, I think. Nice. All right. So let's look at how we actually use this psalm in our liturgy. And you might be surprised or maybe not surprised to find out that we don't actually use this very much. Um, like some of the other psalms that we've looked at that are coronation psalms, the the triumphalism and the emotional tenor of these psalms is very different from the general feeling that the rabbis are trying to create in the prayer book, right? Which is, the prayer book is very supplicative, and we do not have a lot of these psalms that don't have aspects of supplication. But Psalm 47 is used as part of the shofar service on Rosh Hashanah. And part of the reason why, when I first read it, I felt like I had to read it again is because um, uh, this psalm is actually read 7 times before the blowing of the shofar in many Ashkenazi synagogues. And so when I hear the psalm, I hear it said in an undertone and then louder and louder and louder until the 7th time the whole congregation is reciting this psalm really, really, really loud. Now, we don't do this in our congregation because it's the whole text of this psalm. It does not is not in our machzor, uh, but it is in most Ashkenazi machzors. Uh, you know, machzors that contain the full liturgy. Um, and I do wonder, like maybe we should add this in one time. I can bring it to the ritual committee as we could all recite it softly and then a little bit louder and then a little bit louder. I think, not necessarily to do it every year, but to but to explore that how that feels to do that once, I think might be a really interesting thing. And um certainly when I have experienced it, there's a real power in the rising tide of voices that are singing this song. Like almost like the congregation is responding to the command of the psalm itself, to sing to God.
Excuse
So
me, you said
yeah.
that was at the final blast on Yom Kippur?
No, on Rosh
No,
Hashanah.
on
Right.
Rosh Hashanah.
Oh yeah,
Right when?
In the section that's called Seder Tekiyat Shofar, the shofar service,
Uh-huh.
uh, right before the blast of the shofar. Um, and my Machzor, the Lev Shalem Machzor, it does preserve some of the verses of this psalm, especially verse
Mhm.
6. I think it's verse 6. Allah Elohim Bitrua Adonai Bekol Shofar. You can probably hear it. Allah Elohim Bitrua Adonai Bekol Shofar. Um, and the just so that one it remains in the Lev Shalem Machzor. But if you open an Orthodox Machzor, a Machzor with the traditional Ashkenazi liturgy, or you go on Sefaria and you look up Ashkenazi Machzor, you will find this psalm, and it says recite it 7 times. Here's the note from the Koren Sachs Machzor on that page where it is. Psalm 47, a coronation psalm proclaiming God's majesty and kingship, making special reference to the sound of the shofar as the clarion celebrating God's presence and majesty. The psalm contains 7 mentions of the word Elohim, which a mystical approach to the tradition understands that Elohim is God in God's attribute of judgment and justice, as opposed to Adonai, the Tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He, that is God in God's attribute of mercy, right? So, according to the mystical tradition, Elohim refers to God as judge, God in God aspect of judgment. And many people have the custom to say this psalm 7 times, thus ascending 49 rungs on the ladder to God's presence at the 50th level. So every time you say the word Elohim, you're up a rung, up a rung. So each time, 7 times 7 is 49, and that lifts you up all the way to God's presence at the 50th level. I I brought the mystical tradition. I think there's something very powerful about the experience of reading that psalm multiple times. Um, yeah. Any thoughts, reactions, comments?
That sounds to me, I'm very appealing to repeat it 7 times. Um,
Yeah, the um the conservative movement has generally has generally picked up a kind of Litvak or Lithuanian approach to Judaism. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but the association of the Lithuanian yeshiva culture is, well, was before World War II, but when people say Litvak, they don't mean just from Lithuania. They mean ascribing to a more academic minded, dry, I mean, they wouldn't describe it as dry, but they would describe it as
Mhm.
a more intellectual approach to Judaism as opposed to a mystical approach. The the Lithuanian yeshiva culture was very against the spread of popular mysticism that is
mm,
uh, that is represented by the sort of Hasidische world. Hasidism, which venerates a Rebbe as
mm,
an individual, charismatic, mystical leader, and which teaches um, and focuses on the Zohar and on Kabbalah, and which incorporates music and song and dance into the prayer service, and uh, which reattaches itself to a kind of buried mystical tradition in Judaism. The Litvak approach is to dismiss all of that as narishkeit, to dismiss all of that as superstitious nonsense. Uh,
oh,
um, and the conservative movement, in cutting out repetitions of things, uh, I think really leans in to that sort of um, Lithuanian, the sort of misnagid, anti-Hasidic approach
mm,
to Judaism. Like, why would you need to say this psalm more than once? Once you've said it, you understand the emotion, you understand the meaning of the words, right? Saying it 7 times is just a waste of time. That's not gonna it's not gonna change the meaning of the words. But what that fails to recognize is that repetitions actually do change your experience of something. And the mitnagdim, the ones who were against Hasidism, they weren't able to completely stamp out this kind of mystical approach. Like, think about how at the end of Yom Kippur we sing the Shema, and then we sing Baruch Shem Kavod 3 times, and then we sing Adonai Hu Elohim 7 times. And
mm,
saying those 3 words 7 times at the end of Yom Kippur, that, like, the experience of that is different from saying it once. There's something
mhm.
very, like, powerful and primal in that repetition. And I do think that the conservative movement kind of misses some of that. There are a lot of cases where an Orthodox shul might say, yeah, repeat this multiple times. And the conservative movement says, no, just read it once. And I think we miss out some on that. So I agree with you. I think there might be an experiential benefit to repeating this psalm 7 times. I do think that the other aspect of it is that generally the conservative movement acknowledges that most of the Jews in the pews are not understanding the Hebrew. And so repeating a psalm 7 times in the Hebrew, uh, it it's like, I don't know, you didn't understand it the first time. Now we're gonna do it 6 more times, so you feel
Mm.
even more uh crummy about how you don't understand it. And
Oh,
I mean, I think that there's something to that too, right? Like I, I think our Machzor tends to avoid that kind of stuff.
But it could also be in English.
Yeah, I mean, I I
Uh,
do
I and I
I
think
personally feel that repeating this psalm 7 times in English wouldn't have the same spiritual benefit for me as it would in Hebrew, but I'd be willing to try it, and maybe, but maybe repeating it 7 times in the English would also have that same kind of uh
if
power
if it's a simple translation,
if
then
it's
you
simple
can get both
translation.
of them. So you read the Hebrew if the translation is simple and you understand it next to it, that's fine. But I agree with you. I think that we have to go where the people's heads are at a particular time. And I think there's more need for that spiritual uh, connection rather than the straight academic connection. So
Yeah,
my two
I mean,
cents.
most of my sermons are informative, but 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 also deal with the emotional connection that I have to the subject
yes,
material.
I
I
love it.
feel, I do I think the place where I struggle the most is in storytelling, in telling a story that connects. I I have a harder time incorporating stories into my teaching. Um, oh, this reminds me of kind of stories. But I do try to definitely connect to the emotional experience, or really just the experience of prayer, in addition um to the meaning of it. So
Yes.
there's this beautiful comment in Shirashim Rabbah about this verse in Song of Songs. It says Nagila v'nismecha bach, right? Let us exult and rejoice in you. And uh, the Shir Hashirim Rabbah says 10 expressions of joy are employed with regard to Israel. Gila, Sisa, Simcha, Rina, Pitzcha, Tzahala, Alatza, Elza, Hedva, and Trua. These
Wow.
are expressions of joy. And then it gives verses that use each of those um, expressions of joy. And one of them is our psalm, Psalm 47, verse 2. The Hariu, Hariu, right? Shout to God with a joyous voice. So raise a joyous shout is one of the ways of connecting to this psalm. A sense of exhilaration. This is Rabbi Richard Levy. A sense of exhilaration often pervades the coming of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. The signature symbol of Rosh Hashanah is the shofar, the ram's horn, in whose sounds we hear reminders of God's sovereignty, Malchuyot, God's perpetuation of the covenant, Zichronot, and the sounds that were heard at Mount Sinai and are prophesied to be heard at the dawn of the Messianic age, Shofarot. But this psalm suggests that we need not wait until Rosh Hashanah to celebrate God with sounds like Tikiyah and Teruah. Rather, by singing and clapping, we can make a joyful noise of praise to God throughout the year. Every day is an opportunity to do the work of the high holy days, to do teshuvah, repentance for our wrongs, to ask forgiveness of each other and of God, to start anew, and to replace our own egos with God at the head of our life? What does it mean that God rules over our lives? Is it through the mitzvot that God has asked us to fulfill? Is it a realization that everything in the earth is created by and connected to God? When God is above, in the sense of being ascendant over all of our values, this psalm argues, then God will truly rule over our lives, right? So, uh, I think, Rabbi Levi would say, yeah, this psalm is great for Hanukkah. This psalm is great for Rosh Hashanah. This psalm is great for any day where you realize that you want to live a life in accordance with God's values and put God's values ascendant over your own desires or your own, right? To put God first. Any day where you want to raise a shout of thanksgiving to God, to make a joyful noise, right? That is a day where this psalm might be recited. And I do think that it is um, regrettable in some sense that the rabbis did not think that the emotional tenor of this psalm was useful to include in our regular daily prayer service, right? Like clearly they didn't, right? Our this psalm barely touched in the Jewish liturgy. The only time basically that we have this psalm quoted is on Rosh Hashanah. And there it's some verses from the psalm in the uh in the shofar service and some verses from that psalm quoted in Malchuyot in the shofarot section of the Musaf service on Rosh Hashanah, right? Allah Elohim B'Trua Adonai B'Kol Shofar. Adonai B'Kol Shofar. That is a verse that describes a use of the shofar in God's ascendancy. That verse is in the shofarot section of the Musaf. But that's it. Just on Rosh Hashanah, and and then we don't read this psalm other times, right? Psalm 47, not a psalm which is used in our regular liturgy, but the idea of making a joyful noise, of singing a song to God, right? Why? Why not? Why not focus on this psalm? Why not have that kind of exultation and triumph as a part of maybe, if not daily, like weekly, connection to God? I think that there's definitely some, um, the rabbis didn't connect to this psalm in that way. And but maybe we can if we are in this project of reading each psalm and thinking about how we can use it in our own spiritual lives. I think there's a lot of spiritual lessons in this psalm. All right. So, uh, uh, I'd like to close by offering a couple of logistical comments. Most importantly, we will not be meeting next Tuesday, um, because I'm going to be taking some time off to go visit my parents and to celebrate the first night of Hanukkah with them. I will be teaching in person at the synagogue on uh, the 26th of December uh, at 5 p.m. The I will be teaching and we will be lighting the outdoor Chanukiah, the big one in the front of the synagogue. So I and adult education committee has asked me to teach, and I'm going to be teaching I think Daryl has called it Talmud and Hanukkah or something like that. But I had originally titled it An Introduction to Talmud Study using Hanukkah as a springboard. So the point of the class is really to try to understand what Talmud is, and how we use it, why we study it, and how we use it, to try to demystify what Talmud is and it's using some texts from the Talmud about Hanukkah to do that. So that'll be in person on Thursday night, the 26th, from 5 to 6 p.m. and get home by dinner time is the idea. And then the um the next time this class will meet will be on Tuesday, the 7th of January on Zoom at 10 a.m. and we'll be looking at Psalm 48.
Feel
Everybody
better.
should have a festive Hanukkah and a happy New Year, a secular New Year, Gregorian New Year.
Yes. Feel better.
Thank you.
Absolutely feel better.
You.